We're going to begin this morning with breaking news out of California, where another mass shooting has ripped apart a community.
Investigators say a gunman shot and killed at least 7 people at 2 different locations. It happened near the small city of Half Moon Bay, just south of San Francisco. Aerial video captured the moment the suspected shooter, 67-year-old Chun-Li Zhao, surrendered to authorities. Now, this tragedy came just 2 days after a Lunar New Year celebration turned into a nightmare when a separate gunman shot and killed 11 people at a dance hall in Monterey Park, California, near L.A. Multiple law enforcement sources familiar with the investigation say they believe the motive in that attack appears to be personal rather than terror or hate crime related. And now we are seeing harrowing video of a man risking his life to wrestle away a gun from the suspected shooter as he tried to walk into a second dance hall, potentially preventing even more carnage. We're going to get to more on that heroic video with NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin in just a moment. But we begin with Half Moon Bay Mayor Deborah Penrose. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us. I know the last 24 hours have been incredibly difficult, and our hearts go out to your community this morning. I mean, we know these shootings happen at agricultural businesses on the outskirts of your town. Investigators say the suspect is believed to have been a worker at one of these locations. What's the very latest that you're hearing?
I don't think we've heard a whole lot more than what you already know, and that is that the victims were all agricultural workers, that the shooter was probably an agricultural worker. The victims' families have been asked to leave the scene of the crime and not allowed back in. So they are currently being cared for and placed in hotels and cared for by our social service workers.
Mayor, is it true that some families lived on site where these shootings took place? And does that mean it is possible that children may have been witnesses to what happened?
Yes, there definitely were children that were witnesses. It's horrific. It's just horrific. It happened in farmhouse, farm worker housing, and there were families there.
When you hear that detail, what goes through your mind?
I'm in shock. It's horrible. The first thing that comes to my mind is, when are we going to stop? When are we going to stop allowing people to buy guns? When are we going to ban semi-automatic weapons? How many people have to die? How many children have to be killed? How many children have to witness their parents being killed?
Your city is a coastal town, population of around 11,000. What should we know about your community right now?
Our community is pulled together, I can tell you that. All of our city has purchased needed supplies. We work with the Red Cross. We're going to be giving basic assistance tomorrow for lost wages. We'll be providing counseling and support from the faith-based leaders. In our community, we receive donations of food, blankets, snacks. We have translation services that we have provided in both Mandarin and Spanish. Food's been provided. Our fire protection district, our county emergency medical services have provided medical evaluation, county behavioral health and recovery services, and local nonprofits are all providing grief counseling. Our sheriffs are professional, they're hard at work, and they're going to be figuring out why it happened, why this particular incident happened. But I can tell you this: if guns weren't as available as they are, fewer of these deaths would occur.
Mayor Deborah Penrose, I know this has been a difficult past 24 hours for you and your community. We are thinking of you and appreciate you taking some time to speak with us this morning.
Of course.
In Monterey Park, this weekend's mass shooting there has claimed an 11th victim, and it comes as investigators are learning more about the attack itself. Monterey Park's mayor told NBC News the suspected 72-year-old gunman may have been targeting his ex-wife when he opened fire inside a ballroom Saturday. For more, we're joined by NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin in Monterey Park, California. Aaron, investigators say it was terrible. Investigators say it could have been worse. Newly released video shows 26-year-old Brandon Say wrestling the gun from the suspected shooter at a second dance hall just minutes after the attack. He is just an absolute hero. What can you tell us about this terrifying encounter?
Hey, Lindsay. Well, it took 26-year-old Brandon Say just 4 minutes to wrench the gun away from that 72-year-old suspect. A harrowing encounter caught on surveillance footage that took place some 2 miles from where I'm standing now, the Star Dance Studio, where that suspect shot and killed at least 11 people. Say telling NBC's Lester Holt that he believed that the gunman intended to do harm at that second location. Take a listen.
Did he say anything during this encounter?
No, his facial expressions and eyes did most of the talking.
What did those eyes tell you?
They told me he wanted to do harm, like he was a troubled individual trying to do harm to others, make people feel the pain he was feeling.
Now the gunman's motive remains at the heart of this ongoing investigation. Multiple sources telling NBC News that they believe that the motive was personal, not related to terror or a hate crime. The mayor of Monterey Park telling NBC News that they believe he may have been targeting his ex-wife. Lindsay.
Aaron, this is such a traumatic experience for the witnesses, for the families, during what should be a time for celebration and community. What are you hearing there from people in the community?
Well, Lindsay, this is a community traumatized, not only the families and friends of the 11 lives lost over the weekend, but also the survivors. NBC's Lester Holt spoke to a survivor named Sally. She described how when the gunman walked into the studio behind me and opened fire, her dance partner shielded her and potentially saved her life, but lost his in the process. Take a listen.
When did you realize that your partner had been hit?
I realized until I have a blood on my hand.
And it wasn't yours?
It's not yours. I was so scared. I thought I got shot.
He was trying to cover you?
Yeah, he tried to cover us. We are so scared.
Now, authorities have named 3 of the 11 victims, including 63-year-old Lilan Lee, Valentino Alvaro, as well as 65-year-old Mai Nan. Mai Nan's family, her nephew, releasing a statement on her behalf that reads in part, "It's still sinking in what happened to my Mai. She spent so many years going to the dance studio in Monterey Park on weekends. It's what she loved to do. But unfairly, Saturday was her last dance. We are starting the Lunar New Year broken, as is this entire community." Lindsay.
Aaron McLaughlin, thank you.
The shooting in Monterey Park happened as the community celebrated the Lunar New Year. Celebration mixed with trepidation, with hate crimes against Asian Americans on the rise. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has reaction from members of the community.
As you can imagine, many residents here in this community say they've been shaken by this senseless attack. But for many, this felt personal because it happened during one of the most joyous times of the year.
The joy of ringing in the Lunar New Year, gripped by tragedy in Monterey Park.
Heartbroken that it happened on a day where folks are supposed to be celebrating.
Considered the first suburban Chinatown and a safe space for immigrants, the streets offer a flavor of the rich culture that exists in this predominantly Asian community. Here, traditions date back centuries, including the most important of them all.
How sacred is the Lunar New Year for the Asian community?
It's our holy day.
Very important. Yeah, every year we celebrate.
The mass shooting canceled festivities that typically attract tens of thousands of visitors for one of the largest Lunar New Year celebrations in Southern California. Other major cities, including New York, San Francisco, and Seattle, heightened security and adjusted resources for their own celebrations.
We're living in America, and every time we go out, there is that threat.
Law enforcement sources say the 72-year-old Asian gunman's motives were personal. Still, the violence brought up memories of attacks targeting Asians.
I think everyone was on edge that this was going to be another horrific hate crime against Asian Americans.
Recent data show only half of AAPIs feel safe going out, and 65% worry about the safety of family members and elders. Huang Nguyen lives and works in Monterey Park.
Do you think this shooting will change the community?
I think it has already.
Generations have leaned on the city for hope and new beginnings. Now heartbreak in the new year is bringing them even closer together.
We don't want this to be sort of what Monterey Park is known for. It's so much more than a city that's been marked by a mass shooting.
While it's still unclear if Lunar New Year celebrations will be rescheduled here in Monterey Park, we do know that the festivities in Alhambra, where the gunman entered a second dance hall, that event will be moving forward this coming Sunday as scheduled. Back to you.
All right, Kathy Park, thank you.
Let's switch gears a little bit and get a check at your morning News Now weather forecast.
And meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning. We have our next storm system that's going to bring some snow and some rain to folks across much of the eastern half of the country. So let's get to it. Here's what's going on right now. This is the area that we're watching for some continued developing. You see snow in parts of Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and a whole lot of rain spreading to the east of that. This is a couple of things that we're going to see dealing with through the next couple of days. Here's how that system develops. We're going to watch it continue its march to the north and east and eventually spread some snow to parts of the Great Lakes as well as the Northeast. Will we get some snow in New York City? Hold on. Hold that thought. I'm going to tell you about that here in a moment. But we'll also see some rain, and we have a potential for some severe storms through the day today. So here's all of those impacts kind of in one. As we zoom out, 58 million people are now under winter weather alerts. We likely will see this expand as that system continues to move through the eastern half of the country. We're also dealing with 12 million people under an enhanced or slight risk for severe storms as we go through the afternoon hours today and into the early morning hours tomorrow. This means that we could see some tornadoes, possibly, and they could likely be strong as well, EF2 or stronger. So just be aware of that if you live along that Gulf Coast there where you see that highlighted. Now, we'll also have a flash flood risk with potential for anywhere from 1 to 2 inches of snow and some gusty, or rather rain and some gusty winds as well, 40, even close to 50 miles per hour in that same area. How about the snow? This is what, my social media, people cannot stop asking me when New York City is going to get some snow. You can see Springfield.
Lubbock is getting snow.
Exactly. Yeah, it's Joe asking me, actually. Burlington, 4 to 8 inches. Joe, eventually we'll see some snow in New York City, maybe a little bit, enough to possibly keep us out of that #1 spot for the longest since we've seen the first day of snowfall in this year. Notice, no
0 inches.
0. On average, we should have 12 by now. That latest date of the first snow is January 29th. Potentially tomorrow, we could see maybe some measurable snowfall in the morning hours.
All right, fingers crossed. Thanks, Angie.
Thanks. Turning now to the investigation into President Biden's handling of classified material. In a letter seen by NBC News, the White House says it is willing to cooperate with the House Oversight Committee's probe into the matter. NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee joins us now for more on this. So, Carol, this letter was in response to a request for information from committee chair Republican Congressman James Comer. What did it say?
Lindsay, it makes no commitments on the part of the White House to cooperating with the specifics of the requests that have been made by the House Oversight Committee. There's been 2 letters that have sent, one on January 10th, one on January 13th. The first requested that initial information about that initial batch of documents that was found at the president's former office in Washington, D.C., followed by a letter saying, hey, we want all the information on all the documents that are out there as new revelations come to light. But the White House is saying that they are okay with cooperating if this is legitimate, and that's the key line in this statement here, Lindsay. I'll read part of it from the White House counsel's office. It says, we are reviewing your recent letters with the goal of seeking to accommodate legitimate oversight interests within the committee's jurisdiction while also respecting the separation of powers and constitutional and statutory obligations of the executive branch generally and the White House in particular. So that's a lot of legal talk to basically say, We'll consider it. We'll get back to you. There are some legal things in place here that hurdles we may not be able to get over, and also laying the groundwork for saying, hey, this is not legitimate oversight. We're not going to cooperate. And at the same time, the White House is saying, look, you don't have access to these documents. They're with the archives and the Justice Department.
So, Carol, what has the reaction been like from the GOP at large? I mean, have we seen a pretty unified response, or are we seeing some lawmakers with differing opinions?
Well, what we've seen, Lindsay, is that the House Republicans who have oversight authority, they're in control of the House, have been very aggressive on this. They've come out, they've made a number of requests, they're highly critical, they're all over television talking about this. And on the Senate side, it's been a little bit different in the sense that Democrats are in control there, and there isn't the ability for senators who may want to get involved in investigating this to actually do that. So take a listen to some of the senators who've talked about this, Republicans.
Presidents look at classified documents all the time. So here's what I would do if I were the Attorney General. I would stand up in front of God and country and the American people and say, I made an error of judgment.
I'm glad there's a special counsel, but of course that is no substitute for oversight by Congress in a public setting, which is what I hope the House is going to do. I hope the Senate will do it too, but I'm not holding my breath with the current Senate majority. But certainly I hope the House will, and I look forward to seeing what more we're doing.
Now, Lindsay, we also have Attorney General Merrick Garland weighing in yesterday. He was asked about whether the Justice Department is treating the cases of former President Donald Trump in classified documents and President Biden in classified documents differently. He said, no, they're following practices and norms the Justice Department has long followed. Democrats and Republicans are treated the same, and that's what's happening in these instances.
Got to be quick with you on this, Carol, but what's the latest with this Oversight Committee chair letter to the Secret Service?
So this quickly, Lindsay, is the oversight is asking the Secret Service for records that they may have about visitors at President Biden's residences. The idea is to try to get at whether these classified documents that were found there could have been exposed to somebody, and there could be a threat to national security. Secret Service says they'll look at that. They don't keep visitor logs, but they do background checks on people who visit the president's residences. And so there may be some middle ground there. We just don't know.
Okay, Carol, thank you so much.
Staying in Washington, and a day of redemption for fans of Taylor Swift, Ticketmaster and its parent company Live Nation are set to be the focus of a Senate hearing expected to begin later this morning. It all stems from that massive meltdown of Ticketmaster's website back in November when tickets for Swift's Eras tour went on sale, resulting in seemingly endless wait times for tickets and millions of broken hearts.
I don't think all of those hearts have quite healed yet either. Some lawmakers say Ticketmaster has too much power. But Ticketmaster says they're not the ones to blame.
For more on this, we are joined by NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale and NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos, both noted Swifties, of course. Danny.
I think Ali's actually working in her capacity as a Taylor Swift correspondent.
I believe she is, and Danny is about to become one. You didn't know that. Ali, let's start with you here. Big picture, what can we actually expect from today's hearing?
Yeah, some Swifties are still licking their wounds over what happened with the Ticketmaster ticket debacle, but you got to imagine that those of us who remember it all too well are likely to see over the course of 2 hours this morning the head of Ticketmaster, Live Nation, their parent company, defend their reputation against what senators are going to be trying to do, which is show that they might have a little bit too much control over the ticket market. And they're also going to have other bands who are there, including one of the members of a band called Lawrence, talking about the ways that Ticketmaster is able to control the market, the way that musicians and bands are able to go on tour, which is how they make most of their money. So it's about Taylor Swift, but it's also not. You're going to see senators trying to make a lot of points about antitrust and potential monopolies. That's, of course, where Danny comes in, because there's a lot of legal implications to trying to do that. But from the perspective of what we're going to see today, it's going to be a lot about Taylor Swift, but also a lot not about Taylor Swift.
We need a ticker in the corner with all of the song references, right?
Exactly.
All right, so
I only
Danny,
got 2 or 3 in.
we got them.
You got some time before your next one. All right, so Danny, let's talk about this, because after this happened, lawmakers were very quick to essentially say, look, something needs to change. As we just heard from Ali, they say that Ticketmaster has a monopoly on ticket sales. Is that accurate?
Guess who approved a merger between Live Nation and Ticketmaster in 2010? Wow. It wasn't us. It was the DOJ. And to prove a violation, there are a couple different potential violations of antitrust laws. And to prove it, DOJ is going to have to argue that, hey, even though we approved this back in 2010, we think there are monopoly problems today. Ticketmaster could argue the defense of what's called latches. It's basically you snoozeth, you loseth. It's a legal term. You know, if DOJ didn't get involved some time ago, then they've lost their right to complain about this being a monopoly. But, you know, America's a funny place. We encourage through capitalism, go out there, start a business, and if you work really hard, you can take over the industry. But wait, you can't get too successful. Then if you do and you occupy the industry completely, you're a monopoly. And under other sections, courts have said, hey, if you occupy 50% of the industry, that's monopolistic. Ticketmaster occupies about 70% of the industry. Wow. So it's a good chance a court might conclude that they are a monopoly.
But competition is good for consumers. I mean, when you buy a ticket, you see all of those different fees and you think, well, do I have any other options?
Right, exactly. And that's exactly what happens when something takes over an industry. There's zero competition. I mean, you know, try to call a government agency, see what the customer service you get is compared to a private company. That's because when the government occupies a field, it has a monopoly. They're allowed to have a monopoly. Private companies are not permitted to have a monopoly. And that is the challenge, is each case is different. How do they decide, hey, this is a monopoly and this isn't?
I feel like Taylor Swift's next album is going to be called Monopoly, by the way. All right, so
what happened to
let's talk about
that's my music.
Let's talk about what lawmakers can do. Senator Klobuchar spoke yesterday about Ticketmaster ahead of the hearing. Let's hear what she had to say and speak on the other side.
I need to make antitrust sexy again. I need to make industry consolidation and unfair practices, discriminatory conduct. That all sounds really boring, but it sounds a lot more interesting when a Taylor Swift fan is putting it to music.
So, Allie, very quickly here, is there bipartisan support for more comprehensive antitrust laws?
Look, we'll see. You're seeing Senator Amy Klobuchar there, who's an expert in this space. This is a bipartisanly co-sponsored hearing with Senator Mike Lee, so it's bipartisan from that perspective. There is a push right now against things like big tech in the conservative space, as well as from the Democratic side. So you could see some movement on this. I think where there's probably room for some negotiation is when it comes to ticket price transparency. That's something that Ticketmaster's CEO is likely to talk about during their opening statements, something that we could see lawmakers seize on in the coming weeks. But again, this is sort of the opening salvo to if we end up seeing any action on this.
So, Danny, Live Nation is the parent company for Ticketmaster. Here's what they said in a statement. The president said that bots tend to contribute to, quote, an awful consumer experience. So what are these bots here, and are we going to hear about them today?
Yeah, Ticketmaster's argument here is essentially, hey, we have this monopoly, and there are other people who are exploiting that monopoly. That's not much of a defense, but essentially these are systems that get all the tickets first and then resell them at higher prices in what's called the secondary market. But guess what? Ticketmaster also occupies the secondary market as well. There are a few companies that have been able to do that, occupy both the primary market, where you make that initial sale, and then the secondary market, where you resell something.
So they're not the bots, but essentially they have the platform for the bots.
Right. They created the platform. They created the system. And of course, in any monopoly, when demand is high and price is whatever the company wants it to be, of course, scalpers are going to turn around and sell it for more. In essence, in my view, the company is creating the problem of the bots.
Wow. All right, Danny Savalas, Ali Vitale, obviously a lot of interest here. I'm sure we'll be talking about this more. Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.